Chris is going to be speaking. The title of his presentation is Implementation Update for the 2019 Gas Transmission Regulation and New Gas Gathering Regulation. So Chris has been a senior technical advisor for PHMSA's Policy and Programs Office since 2018, after serving for 19 years as the Western Region Director. As Director of the Western Region, carried out and administered the federal and state pipeline safety program for 12 Western states. Chris's current duties are focused on regulatory reform, special permits, and utilizing new technologies to enhance public safety. Chris has worked for the U.S. Department of Transportation since 1990, in the Office of Pipeline Safety since 1993. He has had the opportunity to work both in DC headquarters and in field offices in Anchorage, Alaska, and Denver, Colorado. Prior to government service, Chris worked as a licensed consulting geotechnical engineer in Colorado, Maryland, Washington, DC, and Virginia from 1982 until 1990. Chris has his BS in geotechnical engineering from the University of Nevada and an MBA from the University of Colorado. So thanks again, Chris, for joining us today and presenting on this timely topic. I know there were some updates and some announcements that came out last week, so I think we're all, curious and to get your viewpoint on all these things happening right now. So
certainly.
I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen.
Thanks for that introduction. Just want to quickly talk to you guys about the how we're implementing. When I say we, PHMSA and the state regulators are implementing the 2019 gas rule that came out on October 1st. That's dealing mostly with transmission. And then also give an update. I was putting this presentation together yesterday on the new gas gathering regulation that was signed off just last week. So you're kind of getting a twofer here, because I wasn't expecting to talk about the new gas gathering regulation. Let's see. So today I'm just going to give a quick rule review of where we are with the, yes?
Would you mind sharing your full screen?
I thought I was, hold on. Wait, hold on. Let me get the, I have 3 screens going. I didn't know which
There you go.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Yep. And then if anyone on the line has questions along the way, feel free to chime in, or if you want to write it in the chat feature, you can do it that way as well, and we can answer those questions at the end of the meeting.
Yeah, so I'm going to give a quick status update on the 2019 gas transmission rule, some implementation dates that have occurred in the last few months, some of the compliance tools that the operators and the regulators can avail themselves of, how PHMSA and the states are currently conducting our 2019 inspections. Some areas of where there's a little bit, I call rough spots between what the operator is doing and what we expect. And then the last half of today, I'm going to just talk about the newly issued gas gathering regulation. When I say issued, it's been signed. It has not been posted to the Federal Register. So you're going to hear this term a lot. It's thrown away by consultants, operators, RIN 1, RIN 2, RIN 3. It's basically where they took the mega rule that was proposed all the way back in 2011, and they made a decision to carve it up into 3 parts. RIN 1 is what I'm going to be talking about mostly today. It's the gas transmission regulation. And it was basically addressing San Bruno, where you had a rupture of a grandfather pipeline where the company didn't know the materials they had in the ground. It also addresses, protection in moderate consequence areas. And what promulgated that, or what the impetus was for that, was the Sissonville accident off of I-77 in West Virginia back in 2011. So RIN 1 is what I'm going to spend most of today talking about. It's basically MAOP reconfirmation, assessments outside of HCA's, high consequence areas, and some other minor amendment or less important amendments, but still important, I guess, from a standpoint of safety. RIN 2, which I thought was going to get out next, which is dealing with repair criteria, particularly how to deal with dents and cracks on transmission lines. And then RIN 3, which actually I thought was gonna be a couple years out. It actually got signed last week on November 2nd. It should be posted to the Federal Register any day now. And the reason that's important is because when it gets posted, that's when the clock starts ticking for the effective dates of the regulation. So let's talk about the 2019 gas rule. I said there's lots of parts, a lot of moving parts to it, but the two most important parts, and this again is for transmission lines, onshore steel transmission lines, is MAOP reconfirmation in higher consequence areas. There's a 15-year timeline on that, started ticking in 2020. And the most important parts about that MAOP reconfirmation is if you do not know what you have in the ground, if you do not have traceable, verifiable, and complete records, you need to go out and collect that information. And another part of it is allows companies to use an engineering critical assessment to both evaluate anomalies, but also to reconfirm your MAOP. I'll talk about that shortly, but instead of just rehydro testing or replacing pipe or taking a pressure cut, you do have another method that you can utilize to reconfirm your MAOP. A second part of the rule that has a long timeline to it, but it's very important, is doing assessments outside of high consequence areas. It needs to be done by 2034, and reassessments have to be done every 10 years thereafter. And then there has been changes to integrity management, launcher receiver safety, MAOP exceeds report, but just today I'm just going to focus on those first two long-term programs. So if any of you guys have transmission lines and you need to have MAOP reconfirmation, the stuff I'm going to highlight in the next few slides are what inspectors are focusing on now. They want to make sure, and this is what the code requires, that any MAOP pressure exceedances, they need to be reported. That actually went into place last year. And they need to be reported like they're a safety-related condition. What's different about this, if you have a safety-related condition and you fix it before the reporting deadline, you don't have to report it. In this case, you must report all pressure exceedances, where it exceeds MAOP, regardless of whether or not you corrected the root cause of the problem. Another part of the regulations that went into effect in 2020 was you need to document how you establish your class locations. There is some new IBR documents, particularly with respect to pigging and mostly with respect to pigging and ILIs and ILI interpretation. But there is some new IBR documents in the 2019 gas rule. And then companies last year were supposed to start identifying what areas on their pipeline are going to need to have assessments that are outside of HCAs. So that was all due last year. That when COVID was going on, we gave, except for the pressure exceedance reporting, we gave some relief because of what was going on with COVID. But all that relief is now passed as of the end of last year. Now, these topics are what became due 3 months ago. You needed to begin to use the new incident report form. So if you have a transmission line and you have an incident after July 1st of this year, you're supposed to use the new form. Okay, also operators, if you had a pipeline that needed reconfirmation, you needed to have procedures for how you were going to complete those actions. And as part of completing those actions, as part of knowing what line sections need to have the MAOP reconfirmed, you needed to know where your moderate consequence areas are. And what a moderate consequence area is, think of HCA light. What a moderate consequence area is anywhere where your impact circle, your potential impact radius of your pipeline, if should there be an explosion or a catastrophic release, if it's going to impact any, if the circle is going to impact 5 or more houses or impact a major roadway, that's considered a moderate consequence area. So that now is an area that needs to be considered for MAOP reconfirmation and, remember, assessments outside of HCAs. You also, for any pipes and components, you need to have procedures to start collecting material property and attribute data. So if basically anything new, make sure you have those records and you keep it. Make sure you don't throw anything away. And for the stuff that where you may not have those attribute records, you need to go out and start collecting it. Another set of requirements, key requirements that were due this year is any launchers and receivers that you used after July 1st need to have a means for relieving the pressure and showing what the pressure in the barrel was. And that's in all parts of the barrel, both the upstream and downstream side of the pig. And then also have your first cut of an assessment plan. It should be a risk-based assessment plan of what line segments you're going to assess outside of HCAs. In Pennsylvania, it's probably not a big deal because probably your moderate consequence areas are in line sections that you may already be pigging because you have a high consequence area, because you're a more densely populated state. Maybe in the western parts, it may not be so. But this is really important for a lot of more rural parts of the country because you may have pipelines that are transmission lines, but because they don't traverse any HCAs, but maybe they run parallel to an MCA, or maybe they run parallel to an interstate, they may be getting assessed for the very first time. I don't know if the regulation is going to add that many more miles of pipelines that need to be assessed. Probably, like I said, for those operators that are running pipelines in the more rural parts of Pennsylvania, it may be true. And then this is a key thing, and this is going to be also important with gather lines. There is a new annual report form, and the first time that you have to report MCAs is going to be next March. So that means that you need to have all your MCAs identified this year. You also need to say, hey, if I did any MAOP reconfirmation, let's say you're an overachiever and you've done MAOP reconfirmation, you got to say what line sections have been reconfirmed. Okay, compliance tools. Your state regulators or your federal regulators have a set of inspection forms that they're using. Those inspection forms are posted. I'll talk about that in a few seconds. But there's also been a series of frequently asked questions that have been posted to the Federal Register. We've solicited comments and that we have provided answers to. And it just, we're not changing the regulation. We're not doing backdoor rulemaking to the regulation. We're just providing clarification. So the source of the FAQs mostly came from industry. They go, what do you mean by this? Or could you clarify what the intent of this was? Some of them came from our state partners. We had a few from the public, but they were asking like, hey, you got this great part of the regulation. What do you mean by it? Like I said, we cannot use FAQs to create new regulations, but we can use them to clarify what our expectations are. Or, and a lot of times what we put was coming from the preamble or what came through the Gas Pipeline Advisory Committee meetings. And the sole purpose of the FAQs are to assist in the implementation of the final rule. And we actually are batching these FAQs. We're actually working on our third batch right now. The first were published last September. There was 44 FAQs. The second batch, we got a second batch where after we issued the first 44, we had another 24 questions posed to us. We answered them. They are still in legal review, so I apologize that second batch isn't done, and they are creating a third batch. Of this second batch of 24, I would say this, except for a couple questions, I'll mention them, 58 and 65. Except for 58 and 65, what we presented in that first draft, even after we got the industry comments. There, we made a lot of tweaks. We took the industry comments, but those are the only two that are going to change significantly. So if you want to see the first batch, they were published last September, and the second batch, if you look at what was posted to the Federal Register last spring, you can see those. And this is other places you can find them. I'm not just consider this to be a resource slide. And like I told Drew, you guys can take these PowerPoint, Drew, convert it to a PDF, and you can distribute to the attendees as well as the recording. All right. So let's say you want to know what the inspectors are going to be asking. If you go to the PHMSA website, and it's highlighted here in yellow, and you go to that site, look for PHMSA 2019 gas rule. And what IA is, it means inspection assistance. It's a software program. What this is it's just a download of the questions that the federal and state inspectors are going to be asking. There's 69 new questions. About 30 of them are procedure related, about 30 are record related, and the balance are observations. So, considering this magnitude of the rule, we tried to focus on those questions that were most important. One good thing about it, unlike these other ones that are listed there under the title, IA questions set for distribution, IA questions set for transmission, the ones that are highlighted in that red box, we actually presented them in a format that most inspectors would ask. Instead of just dumping all the questions, I think there's 1,500 gas transmission questions. Instead of just dumping those questions and let you guys sort out how to ask them or how to respond to them, the stuff in red, it's actually presented in what I think is a more logical sequence of how an inspection would be conducted. So that's been up there since late June, early July. And that's a good resource for you. What's really nice about this resource, we actually put a bunch of flow charts on the back, because if you've read our regulations, they sometimes you can get twisted in knots. So as an engineer, I like to put things in flow charts. So what's different about these inspection forms is on the back side in the appendix, there's a series of about 20 flow charts that should help you navigate the regulation. And this is just an example, which pipelines are in, which pipelines are not in. Can you see my hand, Drew?
Yes.
Okay, for example, let's say you're 619C means you're a grandfather pipeline. If you're not a grandfather pipeline, you go down this way, and all you have to worry about is class 3, HCA's class 3 or 4 locations. And if you don't have any, you don't have to reconfirm your MAOP. But if you do have any pipelines that impact HCA class 3 or 4, you come down this way and you say, hey, I have a valid subpart J hydro test. If you have a valid subpart J hydro test, you're off the hook. But if you don't, bam, you got to go back and you have to do an MAOP reconfirmation. Let's track it the other way. Let's say you are grandfathered. Now all you have to do is worry about grandfather pipes that are operating over 30% of SMICE. And then after that's said and done, again, similar to non-grandfather pipelines, you have to worry about HCA's class 3, class 4. And this is where MCAs come into play, piggable MCA. So if you have a highway or a lightly populated area that is running at over 30% of SMICE and piggable, then you have to do MAOP reconfirmation. The point I'm trying to make is the regulations are hard enough to understand as is. We added these flow charts as a way of, just like I said, help navigate the regulation and give you some clarity of, what you should be complying with. Inspection strategy training. We did do 5 pilot inspections of operators that ended up last April. They were Southern Star, Boardwalk, Iroquois, Louisville Gas, and Dominion Questar. So we kind of test ran our inspection questions. We test ran our flow charts. We stole some flow charts where we could. Obviously, we asked permission because we thought they did a good job of helping, some of the operators were using them to untangle their thoughts. So we did those pilot inspections. We reworked our inspection questions, and that's what we posted to the website late June. Now we are currently conducting specialized inspections. Both feds and states are doing that. When I say they're specialized, they're just focused on the new parts of the regulation. Most people said this is hard enough it is. We don't want to try to mush them together with an existing inspection, maybe for a control room or for, I don't know, or just a standard inspection. They actually took the new regulations and just are focusing on that. Some regions went the other way, and they're trying to combine them with scheduled integrated inspections. I think they're quickly learning that this is too much to take on at any one time. So most states, most federal regions are doing specialized inspections for the gas rule, and they are underway at this time. The purpose of the pilot inspections, and I encourage, if you know anybody at those companies I mentioned, and I'll put it up on a screen, sync up our expectations, tweak our FAQs, come up with compliance criteria. The key thing is we want to make sure we're giving fair notice to the operators of what we consider to be adequate or not. And even though we're trying to do fair notice, yeah, did we hit some rough spots? Yeah, we are. But I think we've done a good job at trying to narrow areas of disagreement. Your inspections, if you do have them, should be focused on these 6 topics. So if you're trying to figure out how to allocate your compliance resources, focus on those 6 topics. I would probably say MC identification is probably the number 1 at this point. Here again is the people that underwent the pilot inspections. I didn't mention National Grid before because with regard to National Grid, we were only looking at the part of the regulation where they were taking in situ testing of material properties. So it was kind of a limited pilot inspection. But if you know people at these companies, probably the most important thing is ask them how the inspections unfolded. I don't want to, they all volunteered. I can't attribute the goods and the bads to them, but they can at least give you some insight of, what they encountered during the course of the inspection. And they actually even have the inspection questions with I call them considerations, where we actually said what we were looking for in a little bit more detail. So what do we find during these pilots? What went well? The companies that did best all had a pretty robust GIS database. And they basically overlaid their TVC records, that's a traceable, verifiable, complete records, and MAOP records with maybe their integrity management records. Many of them had them put on their integrated with their alignment sheets. It was impressive, and obviously companies had a long time to prep for this because they aggregated a lot of information and they presented it in a very ordered way. Areas that didn't go quite so well is sometimes it wasn't clear whether the operator was considering their pipeline to be a grandfathered pipeline or not. I know that sounds kind of like, what? But sometimes they said, hey, I get a valid subpart J hydro test, but I still want to be operating over 80% of SMICE, but I don't have TVC record. It's like, I don't have records of what the MAOP was based on. It wasn't clear. So what the inspector is going to do, they're going to say, hey, are you a 619A pipeline or 619C? Because if you do not know that, remember that flow chart that I just had earlier, is that diamond is like, you need to know what they're claiming as their MAOP determination method before you can even move further out. Look for your subpart J compliant records. And this is going to be important for gas gathering as well, because some of the people think they have subpart J compliant records, but if you look at 517, 192, 517, and it's been in existence since 1970, they don't meet the requirements of 517. I'm not saying this happened with any specific company, but with all the acquisitions and mergers of companies, certain companies did a better job at housing their subpart J hydro test records than others. Another thing is companies probably could do a better job at defining what an opportunistic dig is. And that's where you go out and you get material records. And it's supposed to be an opportunistic dig. If you're going out and doing an anomaly evaluation or cutting in a header for a hydro test, that should obviously be an opportunistic dig. You're exposing the whole piece of pipe. You've got a safe working environment. You should take that opportunity to collect material attribute data. It should not be tied to, well, you know what I did? I didn't have time to schedule somebody to get out there, or they weren't available. You know, I need at least 6 months. Opportunistic digs shouldn't be based on contractual obligations. It should be based on, did I expose the pipe? Do I have an opportunity to assess it? But the caveat is, we will, if you can't do it safely, that's not an opportunistic dig. We understand that. Or if you need to get the lights back on or the heat back on, and you need to do a temporary repair, and you can't do a safe excavation, that's not an opportunistic dig. But at the same time, if you are scheduling a repair or a replacement or a hydro test, we do consider that to be an opportunistic dig. So there was a little bit of there was dialogue there. ECA means engineering critical analysis, critical assessments. Make sure you utilize an ECA analysis method that works for your pipeline. It would behoove you to go out and get your material attributes, because if you want to do an ECA, you typically need to have ILI data and you need to have material attributes. And if you do not have your material attributes, you can use some default values in the code, but they're very, very, very conservative. You probably don't want to use them. So if you are going to do an ECA analysis, make sure you have the 2 key things you need to support an ECA analysis, and that's ILI data and material information, material attribute information. And lastly, there's a series of applicability charts in that inspection form. Sometimes it's not clear which components are applicable under material testing. For example, on a blowdown stack, we want to know about the valve, the first valve off the main line. We want to know what the rating is. Stuff further downstream, above it, we don't need to know that. But we want to know anything that you can't isolate off the main line. Those we do want to know what the component ratings are. And it's not, you don't need to collect toughness or Charpies, but we do expect you to know the rating of those components. So those are the overarching pilot results. And when you guys try to demonstrate compliance, focus on those topics. Training, we've had 4 classes. 59 state inspectors have been trained from 43 different states. So the bulk of the states have been trained. There's only 48 state programs, so just a handful have not gone through the training. And of those, most of them didn't have any significant transmission mileage. There has been 22 federal inspectors trained. So there is a cadre of inspectors that have been trained, and the focus has been on consistency and clarity, because we want everybody rolling out the regulations in the same way. Okay, you guys are going to go nuts when they come back and ask you questions that you thought you had already gone over years ago. But we have told the inspectors that since MAOP, original MAOP determination is so important, we've asked them to go back and look at your MAOP and how it was established for 619. And one thing that I want to mention is there was not much focus on how inspectors were ensuring the operator revised their MAOP based on class location changes. 611. I was surprised. I went back and looked at the inspection database and very few questions were asked around 611. I was kind of disappointed about that. So you may see a renewed vigor on that. Like I said, MAOP determination, classification, the resulting MAOP revisions, those are all key to deciding how you move forward with the new regulation. You're going to see these inspections being conducted on a pipeline system basis. You know, you're not going to see all the Trans-Canada systems being done at once or all Enbridge's systems being done at once. You're going to see it on a system by system basis, except for maybe the procedures. And if you have some overarching procedures that apply to multiple systems, they may look at that. The interstate systems, we'll target those. And we're going to use the March 15th, 2021 annual report that was submitted last year as kind of a starting point. And then when I say a starting point is we're going to focus on grandfathered pipelines that are in class 3 and 4 areas or have an HCA. The feds are going to use this IA software program. And they're going to focus mostly on what pipelines fall under the new regulations. Intrastate, they're using an analogous form. It's basically our IA software, but when I say analogous, it's basically a paper version of what's in the software program. And that's what's on the website that you guys have access to. Okay, this is like I said, there was some sticky points between us and the operator. I didn't know what expectations, areas of disagreement, I don't know what you want to call it, but yeah, there is still some rough spots. I think these are the 4 biggest rough spots. Is we mentioned this, what pipelines are in and what pipelines are out, which ones have to be reconfirmed. What is a TVC hydro test? You know, like I said, subpart J has been around since 1970. And if we're going to allow operators not to reconfirm their MAOP based on a hydro test, I want to make sure it's a good hydro test. And when I say non-TVC hydro test, probably the biggest issue we have found is we can't figure out which hydro tests apply to which pipeline segments. We're not talking about being signed off by somebody or maybe not adjusting for elevation in Florida. We're talking about we could not trace or link a hydro test to a specific line section. And we can, that's a non-starter right there. Again, opportunistic dig definition and the proper application of ECA. So I'm kind of circling back to what we found during the pilots. We have conducted some real inspections beyond the pilots, and the same topical areas are of concern. Before I get a new regulation, is there any questions about the 2019 gas rule that you guys want to ask me? I know that's a lot of information I just dumped on you. And remember, this is only for onshore steel transmission regulations. Drew, should I proceed?
Anyone? Yeah, I don't see anyone. Go ahead.
All right. All right. So I've been busy reading the new regulation that came out on November 2nd. As of last night, it still had not been posted to the Federal Register, but I have a feeling that this one, more so than what I was just talking about, may be important to you guys. I included some general slides for you, but the key thing is we're talking about these pipelines up here, and you know, the gas gathering pipelines coming from production to processing before they go into the gas transmission. And the key thing about the regulation is it gets away from the old 2-tier approach to gas gathering. You know, since 2005, I think it was, we have had type A and type B gathering. Type A, there was you had a larger set of regulations applied to type A. It was for class 2 through 4. And then for lower pressure pipelines in class 2 and 4, you had a subset of that. And they've been around since 2005. There was discussion back then about having a basic level of safety requirements for things that are in class 1 areas. But it's funny, if you go back and look at the 2005 regulation, it actually said, hey, it's not a problem. These gathering systems in class 1 are typically lower pressure, smaller diameter. Well, a lot of that has changed since 2005. Now you have, because of all the hydraulic fracturing and the production, you have a lot of larger diameter pipelines that are behaving in class 1 areas that are behaving just like gas transmission lines. So we were directed by the GAO and Congress to come up with additional safety measures for pipelines in class 1 areas. And when I say coming up with, so we had said, okay, we already have type A, we already have type B. The logical response is create something for these larger diameter, higher pressure pipelines in class 1. This is a new term, guys. It's type C. I'm sorry, let me go back up. Type C pipelines. So now you have type A, type B. Now we're going to introduce type C, and it's going to be high pressure pipelines greater than 8 inches operating over 20% of SMICE. And about 90,000 miles nationwide of types, there'll be about 90,000 miles of type C pipelines out there that are going to be affected by this new regulation. So okay, got type C, set that aside. On the other side, what do you do about all the other gas gathering pipelines? You will now be required to report, not take any safety measures, but on anything that's not a type A, type B, or type C, you're gonna have to report them as a, again, love this, I don't know why it's R, type R pipeline. And a type R pipeline is you just have to report information on an annual report and on incident reports as well. So 2 new terms got introduced by this new regulation. Type C, new safety standards. Type R, for anything that's not a type A, B, or C, you're gonna have to do some reporting. And when I say reporting, let me see if I can find this. I'm gonna try to bring this over. Do you see a form here, Drew? Did it come through?
I'm still seeing the PowerPoint. You might have
Dang it.
to drag it to a different screen or.
And let me, I'm not gonna chance losing this. But anyway, there is a new type R form that will be posted at the same time when this regulation is posted to the Federal Register. It's a new type R form. Industry wanted it carved off separately than the reporting for type A, type B, and type C. The key thing about this type R form, it's going to impact about 400,000 miles of pipe. So you're going to have to report on 400,000 miles of unregulated. When I say unregulated, unregulated from a safety standpoint, not unregulated from a reporting standpoint. So what's going to apply to type C? It's a tiered approach. And I'll talk about this, but these are all the different things that can apply to type C pipelines. Depending on the diameter, depending on the location, more or less of these are going to apply. For example, if it's remote and it can't impact any people, I think only damage prevention and emergency plans apply. But as you get bigger and you can impact more and more people, then more and more of these requirements will apply. And I have a better chart that'll say which ones apply to what. So let's talk about it. So bottom line, let's do this up front. All gas gathering lines are going to have to be reported. If it's a type C, it's going to be reported on the old form. If it's a unregulated or type R pipeline, it's going to be reported on a new form. So it's going to impact 2 forms. This is something I haven't fully explored, but it looks like the use of incidental gathering is going to be limited to 10 miles or less. So before, as stuff came in, you could keep resetting the clock and it would remain gathering as long as you kept having inputs to the pipeline. This now limits it to 10 miles. And after 10 miles, it's considered a transmission line. And that kind of brings us full circle back to what I was talking about with the MAOP reconfirmation regulation. If it's all of a sudden gone from what you may have considered gathering before, it may now be considered a transmission. So yeah, incidental gathering is now limited to 10 miles or less, and that is a departure from RP 80. I don't think there, from what I can read, there was no other definitional changes adopted, just that one. Here's the breakdown of what's covered by as a type C. There's 91,000 miles of type C pipeline. They have to do the damage prevention emergency response planning. Okay. Of that 91,000, 20,000, because of where they are and what they and their characteristics, they also have to do public awareness, line markers, and corrosion control leak surveys. And then even a smaller subset of that is subject to MAOP requirements. So 91,000 is the total type C pipelines, but then as you get more and more risky pipelines, you have to add more and more requirements. Here's another way of looking at it right here. This is a key slide. Reporting, all gathering, it's over 400,000. Design and construction, that's only for new and replaced. Damage prevention, anything greater than 8 and 5/8. Same thing, emergency plans. They apply to all type C. Then as you get a little bit bigger, between 8 and 5/8 and 16-inch, if you can show you can't impact anybody, you don't have to do this, but anything greater than 8 and 5/8 to 16, you got to do public awareness, line markers, corrosion control, leakage surveys. And then when you get bigger than that, then you have to start applying 619. There's some for plastic pipe. I'm not too sure what that is. So this is kind of the tiered approach to what applies to these type C pipelines. It's dependent on diameter and proximity to people. Here's another way of cutting it. So like I said, I was pulling information from different places. I actually found this slide to be the most useful. I'll let you guys absorb this right now for a few seconds. So only a couple of things apply for the smaller diameter pipelines, but as you get bigger and bigger and impact more and more people, more and more stuff kicks in. So I think this is the operative slide that you guys want to look at. That's it. Drew, any questions after that? I'm going to leave this slide up because I think, like I said, this kind of sums up the new rules. Drew, can you hear me?
Sorry, yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
So we'll open it up to questions now from the.
Sure. Either on the 2019 gas rule for MAOP reconfirmation, or just be kind to me about the new gas gathering regulation, because I just read it for the first time over the weekend. All right.
If anyone's on the line, just unmute yourself and feel free to ask a question. Okay, it looks like we got one coming in on the chat. So was there a specific incident that triggered the new gas line rule?
Well, there was a series of incidents. I'm not that familiar with all of them. I know there was one in Center Township, Pennsylvania in 2018. That's probably the most recent one. There was another one in 2018 in Midland. Gas gathering, two others, a 24-inch in Grady County, Oklahoma. And then the other one was, it was initially precipitated by a 2010 incident in Texas, where a bulldozer struck a 14-inch gas gathering line. So yeah, there's a series that, when I'm looking at the regulation, I'm looking at the announcements, there appears to be 4 incidents that precipitated the regulation. The latest being in Center Township, Pennsylvania, which I believe is in Western PA. I don't know the details of that one. Does anybody on the phone know the details of the one in Western PA, Center Township?
Yeah, I'd be curious to know too. I didn't Google it yet, but I know Center Township is close to Beaver.
Yeah, okay. And okay, so you're not close to Ohio. Another thing that precipitated this kind of, I think, moved this regulation to the front of the pack as far as which regulations get out now. Because I thought the RIN 2 on repair criteria, or I thought the valve rule was going to get out first. I believe one of the biggest motivators of this rule was methane emissions under the new administration. They're concerned about methane emissions from previously unregulated pipelines, particularly when they get as large as some of these new gathering lines are. If there's a catastrophic release, I think the estimate was on average 1,000 metric tons of methane are released from each pipeline rupture from a gathering system. And there has been some as much as 1,300 metric tons. That's coming from a press announcement I saw on the website. So yeah, safety obviously is the most important thing. I'd say the second thing, and one reason this rule came out, was with regard to methane reduction.
Okay, there's looks like someone did say it in Center Township. It was the Revolution pipeline landslide and explosion. So that was Energy Transfer Sunoco.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if that was who technically was the owner or operator for that, but yeah.
Interesting.
So a couple more questions coming.
So it must have been, can I ask a question? Was it a pretty new pipeline that had just been installed, or did they have land movement? Probably broke a weld or something. Was it land movement right after construction, or was it an older gathering
I believe
line?
it was pretty soon after construction. I don't know if anyone else could chime in, but I don't think it actually ever went. I don't know how long it was in service for, but I don't believe it was very long at all. Seth, do you happen to know the specifics on that?
Yeah, no, I don't know the specifics, but like you said, it definitely was not in service for very long when the landslide and then explosion happened. So, yep.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, obviously I'm a geotechnical engineer, so this is my wheelhouse, but at least in the Western region, the last 10 or 15 years, it seems like virtually all the big incidents were in regard to slope stability or river crossings. Land movement, subsidence in areas where we had mines. So there is a renewed focus, at least at a couple of the regions, on P&M measures, preventive mitigative measures with respect to ground movement, geohazards. So if you all of a sudden, you guys, if you start seeing questions being asked, so why are they asking all these questions about slope stability? It's because a lot of the catastrophic releases we have had across the country are a result of geotechnical issues.
Got a couple other questions coming in. One, how much of the mega inspection / audit is centered on actual record PDF review versus process?
Okay.
GIS
currently it's mostly process, I would say, except for MCAs, because it's so new. There's a 14-year timeline roughly. So there's really not that many records to look at yet. I would say we're focusing mostly on MC identification, or whether or not they have a valid subpart J hydro test. Because if you look at the regulation, it really does give pipelines an out if they can come up with a valid subpart J hydro test. So I would say those two records, MCAs and subpart J hydro tests, are what the focus is going to be on in the short term. And
then we got another
PIR exception.
Yes. Okay, you see
I had questions about that. Let's see. The PIR exception. Give me a second. All right. The reason I know this, because I circled it like 10 times myself. Okay. if the pipeline segment is not located where it can impact any building intended for human occupancy, then they don't have to do it. And when the PIR, you use that 192.903, which is under subpart O, but if you can demonstrate that you cannot impact, oh, I'm sorry, only if the pipeline is under 16 inches. So if the pipeline is under 16 inches and you can't impact any people, I'm putting this in simplistic terms, then you do not have to, you're not considered a type C pipeline. And that part of the code is under 192.9 F exceptions. 192.9 F under exceptions. Oh, let me see if I can do this. I want to bring up let me get out of here for a second, okay?
Okay.
I'm gonna try to a second. Kind of a, let me see if I can share. Are you seeing a website right now?
Yes.
Okay, let's find out where this is. So it's not published in the Federal Register, but you know, just like, you know, so let me go back. So here's the PHMSA.dot website. Go to the latest news and actions. This is where you see this. They have actually put the regulations up here. Again, I caution you, this has not been published in the Federal Register, but what I'm talking about, because this is an important exception, because if you're in the middle of nowhere and you're less than 16 inches, you possibly could be exempt from part of the regulation. I apologize for making you guys nauseous as I go through this. 192.9 F. I hope this answers whoever asked that question. Exceptions right there. So if you're less than 16 inches and you can't impact any building intended for human occupancy or other impacted site, you don't have to do it. The other one is the segment's not located within a class location unit. So basically, I have to look at this more closely. The other method is, I guess it'd be you know, you determine your class, but let's say it's class 3, but your PIR can't impact any. Let's say everything is outside of your PIR. So yeah, these are two exceptions for whether or not you consider type C or not. This one's a little bit harder to understand. Segment is not located within a class location unit. Obviously, if you're class 1 and you have no buildings, you're out. I wonder if though this applies to, let's say you're a class 3, but you can't impact. No, I think this is almost like a class 0. There's no, you basically have a slotting mile with no buildings. That's how I would read it. Like I said, you're catching me right after the rule came out, so I apologize. Any other questions?
Anything else?
All right, Drew, like I said, go ahead and share that documentation with them in a PDF form. And if there's any other questions, they can give me a call. Like I said, I can answer the 2019 gas rule, gas gathering. I can answer them, the more simplistic aspects of the regulation, but I will find you the right person to talk to.
Okay. All right. Well, we appreciate your time, Chris. Thank you so much for the presentations. Very,
of course.
So yeah, for those on the call, I'll make sure to get a PDF of the presentation sent out. We'll also be sending a video recording of the webinar for anyone that registered. So
all right.
Okay.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you guys, and we hope to see you at the event in December. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.